Chapter 22 of Zhang Henshui's Golden Fen family. The family first met and spent the night in search of beauty. They were drunk at night and walked on the moon until dawn. Wang Xiang came into the room from the outside, and Aunt Li was also busy cutting fruits and putting them on the sugar plate, sending them inside again and again. Wang Xiang took Fengzhu's hand, sat on the wooden bed with them, and said with a smile, "It's very cool tonight. You see, I'm wearing two clothes. Now that you three are here, I'm getting warmer. I want to. Time to change clothes." After saying that, he took a piece of clothing from the glass cabinet and moved it to the back of the cabinet. After a while, he took off the red short coat and put on a moon-white silk gown. Zhu Yishi said with a smile, "You shouldn't change clothes." Wang Xiang said, "Why shouldn't you change clothes?" Zhu Yishi said, "We are all in the same place, making a lot of noise. Isn't it good? Once you change, you will feel cooler. It's better." Wang Xiang said, "We should keep the heat in our hearts, not on our bodies." "Master Jin, are you right?" Zhu Yishi said, with a smile. "Don't we agree not to call you master? Why did you call me here again?" Wang Xiang said with a smile, "It's my fault. How should I be punished?" Liu Weiren said, "Then just ask Uncle Jin. You can punish me as you want." Sheng said, "That's right." Liu Weiren said, "Brother Fengzhu, did you hear that? She wants you to punish her." Wang Xiang said, "I haven't finished speaking yet. You rushed to say, is that what I said?" "I mean, Mr. Liu asked me to call him uncle." "That's right. We northerners are the most polite, and it's even better than the southerners." As he spoke, Zhu Yishi took a look. "Watch." Because he smiled at Liu Weiren and said, "I looked at this watch when I entered this room." Liu Weiren said, "How is it? Has it passed the legal time?" Zhu Yishi said, "Not only has it passed the legal time, that's enough for a double turn." Fengzhu stretched and stood up. Wang Xiang looked at the situation and saw that they were about to leave. He quickly grabbed the 3 hats from the hanger, held them in his hand, and smiled at Fengzhu. "Uncle, are you so disrespectful? I know that the house is not good, and the people are not good, but the uncle is here this time. I won't come the second time. But this meeting today is a rare event. I have to let you sit for a while to feel better." Fengzhu smiled and said, "I won't come here, so forget it. Once you come, you must come often." At this time, Aunt Li and Ma were standing outside the door. When they heard the news that Fengzhu was leaving, they rushed in. Aunt Li also called me uncle and said, "Uncle, since you want to come here often, why can't you sit here for a while, when you are here for the first time today?" Fengzhu said, "There is a reason for this, and you will understand it as soon as I tell you. I am here today. We have made an appointment with these 2 gentlemen. Everyone from the Bei team will go in and throw a plate. If you sit here for a long time, why don't you go elsewhere? Now that I'm out, I'm sure I won't come back again. This trip is casual. I will visit at least 10 or 20 houses this night. Do you know which girl can catch my fancy?" He smiled and said, "Your girl is what I like." Wang Xiang curled her lips and said, "Don't blame us. Since the uncle likes me, why don't you sit there for a while?" Fengzhu said, "If you are here, if you sit here too much, you won't be able to go from house to house." Aunt Li said, "Every house is looking for the girl of their choice, and every house is looking for the girl of their choice. As long as you find it, why bother to go to every house? If we, the little girl, are not what the uncle likes, there is no need to bother looking for her again. The face has to be given to our little girl today, and it won't be too late to look for her again tomorrow. Block the door of the room." Fengzhu smiled and said to Zhu and Liu, "We can't leave like this." Liu Weiren said, "We are following the master's wishes. If the master wants to sit for a while, just sit for a while." Wan Zhongla, holding Fengzhu's hand, he said, sit down, no one else is saying you can leave. Do you still have the nerve to go?" Fengzhu had no intention at all, so he sat down with a smile. When Wang Xiang saw Zhu Yishi's handkerchief on the table, she asked her mother to fetch a basin of cold water, and personally gave him the handkerchief with scented soap on the wash basin stand. Zhu Yishi smiled and said, "Excuse me, but we have to sit and wait for the handkerchief to dry before leaving. When will it be?" Wang Xiang walked to Zhu Yishi, raised her right hand, revealing a yellow silk handkerchief tucked into the button under her ribs, said with a smile, "If you don't mind it being dirty, take this one and use it first." Zhu Yishi took off his handkerchief, sniffed it on the tip of his nose, and said with a smile, "It smells good, thank you." Liu Weiren clapped his legs and said, "I have to leave." I can't stand this anger. Wang Xiang smiled at him and said, don't be busy. Liu Weiren smiled and said, don't be busy? Is there anything else you can give me? Wang Xiang said, of course there is. As she said this, she wiped her hands with a towel, dug inside her clothes for a while, took out a small crimson silk handkerchief, handed it to Liu Weiren with a smile, and said, this, how about it? Liu Weiren said, thank you. I don't think you can do anything. Wang Xiang said, look, if I don't give you a handkerchief, you will be angry. What kind of method? Zhu Yishi also smiled and said to Feng Zhu, brother Feng Zhu, you have met me today. This child is smart and good at spying on people. You, a good young man in a troubled world, need this flower of interpretation. Flower. Wang Xiang couldn't understand what he was saying, but judging from his expression, it was because he was praising her in front of Feng Zhu. She couldn't take her eyes off Feng Zhu's color. Feng Zhu said with a smile, I'm just acting on occasion, it's nothing. But you too have been bribed by others. How do you hand in the papers? Zhu Yishi said, I understand what you said, but I can't say it myself. You want us to match up with you. Liu Weiren said, you just guessed what he was thinking. Yin turned around and asked Wang Xiang, do you know what we are talking about? Wang Xiang shook her head and smiled. I don't know. Zhu Yishi glanced at her and said, we have to say good things to Uncle Jin for you. Why don't you? Thank you. Wang Xiang nodded quickly and said, thank you. Then he used his 4 white teeth to crack the melon seeds, then used his fingers to plier out the kernels. I smashed a handful of melon seeds and gave them to the 3 of them. In this way, after sitting for an hour, the guests and hosts were extremely happy. Feng Zhu felt around on his body and took out 2 10-yuan bills. He put them on the table and pressed the melon seeds plate down. Zhu Yishi saw this and glanced at Liu Weiren, who smiled slightly. Feng Zhu knew clearly that the 2 of them were talking about him, so he just pretended not to know and still dealt with it calmly. Wang Xiang glanced at it and saw 2 10-yuan bills under the plate. She looked like this was not a one-time guest, and she couldn't help but like it. Feng Zhu and Zhu Liu said goodbye and left, so she no longer forced her to stay. Zhu and Liu had already walked out of the room, but Wang Xiang pulled Feng Zhu's clothes and said with a smile, wait a minute, I have something to say. At this moment, she quickly opened the glass cabinet and took out something, put it in Feng Zhu's hand. He smiled and said, this is a new one. I give it to you as a souvenir. Feng Zhu took it over and looked at it, but it was a 4-inch bust portrait of Wang Xiang, which was quite beautiful. So he put it on his body and said with a smile, is this really new? Wang Xiang said, isn't it new? It hasn't been a few days since I got it back. Feng Zhu asked, how many copies were printed? Wang Xiang said, 2. Feng Zhu said, there are only 2. Can you give me one? Wang Xiang said, that's a strange thing to ask. Can't you just print 2 and give it away? Feng Zhu said, that's not what you said, because this is the first time we've met, and it seems we haven't talked about sending photos yet. Just as he said this, Zhu Yishi shouted in the yard, are you done with the love words you just said? You deceived us. Are you happy to stand in the yard? Feng Zhu agreed. Come on, come on. Wang Xiang held both of his hands, leaning back slightly, and said with a smile, will you come tomorrow? Feng Zhu said, people outside, if you get anxious, just let me go. He opened the curtain with one hand, but Wang Xiang still held the other hand firmly. After shaking for a few times, he looked at Feng Zhu and said with a smile, come tomorrow, I have to come tomorrow. Feng Zhu promised to come over and over again, then got away, and walked out with Zhu and Liu. Zhu Yishi said, brother Feng Zhu, you said that one family only sat there for 10 minutes, but the first family sat there for more than an hour. You also said that you are a person who often walks among flowers. How can you be fascinated by others so cheaply? Feng Zhu said. He said, why are you fascinated by her? I'm afraid there is no solid evidence, right? Zhu Yishi said, how can there be no solid evidence? It's a bit excessive for you to leave 20 yuan on the first plate. This is not enough. Is that considered evidence? Feng Zhu said, why don't you tell me? You see how they treated us when we went there? I'm afraid it cost more than 2 yuan for each of you. Do you want me to leave after just throwing away $2? Zhu Yishi said, of course, $2 is not enough to repay someone's kindness, but it's good to pay as little as $5 or as much as $10. Liu Weiren said with a smile, let's not talk about this level. You spent 20 yuan on the first visit. Once this case is opened, how will you get rid of it in the future? Feng Zhu said, I won't go there in the future. Zhu Yishi said, isn't that an argument against your will? Feng Zhu said, stop talking. Unintentionally, we have already passed by a house and we have to go back. So the three of them turned around and walked back. The people in this family were more relaxed. Qingqiu opened the door curtain and led them into a room. When they went in, they saw that the furnishings were extremely gorgeous. Next to the window, there was a sofa, chair, and a woman in her 40s was lying there talking on the phone. When he saw the three people coming in, he ignored them, only glanced sideways, and went to call her. The three of them sat down, and the turtle slave asked, as usual, if there were any acquaintances. Then he shouted loudly in the yard to see the guests. After a while, the girl came. The turtle slave opened the curtain and rolled the names, and the girl stood at the door for a while and passed. There were 4 people in total, all in their 20s, and none of them looked good with makeup. Finally, Qingqiu said to the woman on the sofa who was on the phone, the one in the room is called Hua Hongxiang. There is another one who left a note and didn't come back. Feng Zhu and Zhu Yishi spoke a few words in English, and Zhu Yishi said, unless this is the case, we will have to live together. Feng Zhu said to Qingqiu, since we are sitting in this room, we are just one of them. After hearing this, Hua Hongxiang was surprised. Unexpectedly, these 3 young men in suits and leather shoes actually felt sympathy for each other, so they stood up with smiles and asked each of them their names. As she came closer, Feng Zhu looked at her face carefully and found that there were some slight wrinkles, which were all covered up by the thick powder. She was very forgiving, and after taking in the tea and cigarettes, she moved a chair and sat down opposite the 3 of them, unlike the prostitutes next to them who were crowded together. She was only wearing a light green gauze gown, which was not very flashy. She smiled and said, Master Jin, where did we meet once? Feng Zhu asked, will we meet once? Where? Hua Hongxiang said, this year's Lantern Festival. You and he see I will grow up? Is it possible to listen to a play on the first stage? Feng Zhu tilted his head and thought for a moment, then smiled. Yes, it is possible. It turns out you were the one in the box. I thought it was that time. Where are the elders' family members? Hua Hongxiang said, otherwise I wouldn't remember it. It was the elder he who said that this was Prime Minister Jin's eldest son, so I remembered it because 10 years ago, Prime Minister Jin and Mr. I've seen him often. Feng Zhu said, so you and he have been friends for a long time? Hua Hongxiang said, we've known each other for about 20 years. Zhu Yishi smiled. He said, I have something to say, but I want to ask it a little more abruptly. In this case, why don't you marry He Siqing? Hua Hongxiang sighed and said, it's hard to say this. To be honest, I was unwilling in the past. Now, he doesn't want to. Liu Weiren said, that's not necessarily true. If he doesn't want to, why would he still associate with you? Hua Hongxiang said, this is just an old relationship, and we can still communicate with each other like friends. Are you talking about love? Liu Weiren said with a smile, that's true, but I don't know how many people have the same feelings as He Siqing. Hua Hongxiang said, that's quite a lot, so I just rely on it. These old customers remain. As for the new customers, it's rare to see them in a few days. Feng Zhu smiled and said, why are you so polite? Hua Hongxiang said, I'm really telling the truth. I'm not being polite. Even if the 3 of them greeted me, it was just a moment of curiosity, don't you think? Everyone saw her talking straight to the point, so they started talking to her. She also has a good understanding of human feelings and understands the world. Later, Zhu Yishi asked, since you have so many feelings, why do you still do business outside? Hua Hongxiang sighed and said, that's nothing you can do. She only said these few words and did not go on. After talking for a while, Feng Zhu wanted to leave, but I also explained that I came here out of curiosity, and after sitting there for a while, I could prove that statement more and more. So he had to sit down patiently. Zhu and Liu were also worried about this and refused to leave immediately. Everyone sat for a while, and a group of regular customers happened to come to Hua Hongxiang, so everyone took this opportunity to say goodbye. Hua Hongxiang understood very well and did not say that she would come tomorrow. She only said that if you have nothing to do, please come and sit down. When everyone came out, Zhu Yishi laughed and said, the young ones are too young and can't leave for the sake of face. The old ones are too old and can't leave for the sake of face. Tonight, we only left to families. It's so troublesome. If we walk around 8 houses, we have to wait until dawn. Feng Zhu said, that doesn't matter. It's a hot day anyway. Walking all night until dawn is just to enjoy the cool weather. The 3 of them were joking all the way, and then again as they left. 4 or 5. At this time, it was already dark, and the lights at the doors of the various teams in the alleys gradually went out. Although the cars and chartered vehicles in the alleys were still lined up next to the doors of the houses, there were very few pedestrians on the road. The 3 of them happened to walk through a short and cold alley. When they looked down, they suddenly saw a piece of white on the ground, revealing 3 figures. When they looked up, they saw a waning moon that was 7/10 full, hanging diagonally on the power lines. Liu Weiren said, it's the 18th or 19th day of the lunar calendar, right? The moon has risen so high, it's already late at night. Feng Zhu said, if you hadn't said that, I would have forgotten the moon. No wonder there is this white spot on the ground. The moon must have been so smoky in the alley that it couldn't even be seen. Zhu Yishi laughed, that means you can't go to brothels. Feng Zhu said, come here once or twice occasionally. It's just for fun, it's no big deal. If you come here all the time, day or night, rain or shine, you'll get dizzy. Zhu Yishi laughed. Fortunately, Brother Feng Zhu made it clear in advance that it doesn't matter if you come here once or twice occasionally. Otherwise, after listening to what you said, we could have gone home right away. Feng Zhu laughed. We came here to have fun today, not to find a lover here. It doesn't matter if we have such thoughts. Zhu Yishi laughed. After all, Brother Feng Zhu is right. Let's go. Let's go to a few more brothels. The 3 of them talked and walked into another one. At this time, it was late at night and there were fewer people. Several prostitutes were standing in the yard, enjoying the cool air and gossiping. Feng Zhu and the other 3 had not yet stepped forward when suddenly a very clear voice came from the crowd, calling Master Zhu. While they were talking, a prostitute came over and shook Zhu Yishi's hand, and said with a smile, Master Zhu is happy today. How come you have time to come here and sit down? Feng Zhu looked at the prostitute, who was no more than 20 years old, but had some beauty, a petite body, and did not look like a northerner. He smiled and said, so you are Brother Yishi's noble friend. Great, great. As they were talking, the host and the guests rushed into the house like a gust of wind. Feng Zhu asked the girl's name, and it turned out to be Wang Jinling, a famous prostitute. She smiled and said, so you are Jinling. I've heard of you for a long time. Wang Jinling smiled and said, I don't know anything. Don't laugh at me. She didn't know Jin and Liu. After a few words, she took Zhu Yishi's hand and sat on a sofa chair with them. She smiled and said, what have I done to offend Mr. Zhu? Why don't you come? Zhu Yishi smiled and said, how have you offended me? If you had offended me, would I still come so late at night? Jinling said, whose lover's place are you 3 coming to? Why are you making such a fuss at this time? Zhu Yishi said, I'll tell you honestly. Mr. Jin will be checking the night in the alley tonight. Then he told Jinling what had happened. As soon as Jinling saw Feng Zhu's appearance, she guessed that he was a wealthy man. Now that she heard that he had done such a heroic act, she guessed that he was no ordinary person either. So she smiled and said, Mr. Zhu, you came to my place by chance. It doesn't count as Mr. Jin sitting here. He should invite someone else. Zhu Yishi smiled and said, how about it? Ask her to introduce someone. Okay? Feng Zhu said, it's enough for him to sit here. Why should I find someone else? I'll only invite someone like Jinling if I want to. Jinling smiled and said, Mr. Jin, why are you taking advantage of us? Feng Zhu said, this is admiration for you. How is that taking advantage of you? Jinling said, oh, I don't deserve that. Mr. Jin, please don't be offended if I don't treat you well. Zhu Yishi smiled and said, don't talk nonsense. We've been shopping all night and are a little hungry. Is there anything to eat? Give us something to eat. When Jinling met such a distinguished guest, she was afraid that she would not do anything fancy. The more she made a fuss, the easier it would be for her to make money. Hearing Zhu Yishi asking for food, she quickly said, yes, noodles? Liu Weiren smiled and said, we've been partying all night and are exhausted. We can get some wine to drink. Jinling said, it's so hot in this weather. There are some restaurants that stay open all night. Just ask him to bring some wine. What's wrong with that? As she spoke, She walked out of the room, gave the order, and in less than half an hour, the restaurant sent over 2 boxes of wine and food. When she opened the lids of the boxes, they were steaming hot. Feng Zhu said, "It's still so troublesome. Are they all stir-fried dishes?" Jin Ling said, "I also heard the masters say that they were afraid that some bugs might fly onto the cold dishes, which would be unhygienic to eat. So they ordered cooked dishes. The restaurant is not far from here, so I asked them to get a few first and send them over later." Feng Zhu said, "It's rare to be so thoughtful. Master Zhu must give you a big face to make it reasonable. No matter which one it is, I count it as one." Jin Ling smiled and said, "Master Jin, thank you." Zhu Yishi said, "Some people make wishes, and some people accept thanks. This has nothing to do with me. Brother Wei Ran, let's drink." Jin Ling curled her lips, looked at him, and smiled softly. "Look, you are so jealous." Li Wei Ran clapped his hands and cheered on the side, and everyone started to make a fuss. At this time, the wine and food had been placed on the table in the middle of the room, and the fan was turned on. The 3 men and 1 woman drank happily. Fortunately, it was past 2 o'clock at this time, and there were fewer tourists in the alley. The group was quiet, so Jinling could chat with them. Some nosy girls came in to talk to Jinling and join in the fun. Jin and Liu chatted with each other, and each of them called a girl. The one Feng Zhu called was Yudao, and the one Liu Weiren called was Huakui, who also sat behind each of them and persuaded them to drink. Everyone was drinking happily, and suddenly talks were heard in the distance. Feng Zhu said, "Oh, it's very late, we should leave." As he said that, he stood up, and his body swayed a few times. He felt a little dizzy. He held the table with both hands to support his body, and smiled. "I'm really useless. I'm a little drunk." Yudao saw it, but she personally wrung a hot towel for Feng Zhu and sprinkled a lot of floral water on it. Feng Zhu felt more energetic after the aroma. He ate a few more slices of snow pear on the plate, then went to lie on a sofa, and said with a smile, "It's been a commotion. Tomorrow afternoon, there are 2 important matters to be handled at the government office. Let's go back and have a rest." Yu Tao pulled Feng Zhu's hand and said, "It's almost dawn. Let's go back at dawn." Liu Weiran was also a little tired. He agreed with Feng Zhu and sat aside. Zhu Yishi said, "At this time, there are no cars. There are only a few rickshaws left in the alley. There are no more people." Feng Zhu said, "Don't take a car. Let's take a walk first." The 2 talked while walking on the street. They saw nothing in front of them. Although the waning moon was only slightly to the west, the sky was already transparent in the dark, but there were a few big stars, shining brightly, reflecting the moonlight. The moonlight shone on people, and there were only faint shadows on the ground. Feng Zhu said, "If we walk this way, it will be bright when we get home. Let's not go to the park. I'm going home to sleep." Liu Weiren also agreed. They hired a car and went home. Feng Zhu got home and knocked on the door for a long time before it opened. When he went into the house, all the doors were closed. His knock woke up the servants and the old maids. Feng Zhu returned to his yard and saw a hammock hanging under the corridor. There was a gauze curtain hanging over the hammock, which was just right for sleeping. He thought to himself that he might as well sleep here first, to avoid knocking on the door of the main house and disturbing his wife. He would go in after the old maid opened the door. So he put his hat on the ground. He lay down on the rattan table without taking off his shoes, and just lay down on the hammock. Unexpectedly, he was exhausted from the night of debauchery. As soon as he lay down, he closed his eyes and fell asleep in a short while. Zhang Ma, who had asked for leave, had not returned yet. At about 7 o'clock, Li Ma, who did the rough work, opened the hall door and saw a person sleeping on the hammock. She was shocked. When she looked carefully, it turned out to be the master who had returned. She did not dare to disturb him for the time being. She would go and tell Pai Feng when she woke up. It would not be a big deal to tell her, but it would cause a big disaster. Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.